I'm very excited you're all here. Thanks for joining this talk by James Prochnik and David Oxton. My name is Anja Hitzenberger. I started StrudelmediaLive. We offer online photography classes. Tonight's talk is a collaboration of StrudelmediaLive and New York City Photo Community Newsletter, which was founded by James. So I'm very excited that we are collaborating on these talks together. Tonight's talk is all about trains, photographing from trains out, which is what James is doing, and photographing from people's backyards towards trains. I love traveling by train, so I'm excited about this talk and about this theme. All right, so I would like to briefly introduce our speakers today. James Prochnik is teaching for StrudelmediaLive. He has taught 2 street photography related classes recently. He has been published in the New York Times, Fortune, USA Today, and Shots magazine. And in addition to projects about trains, he's working on a photo project about New York City parks. He is, as I mentioned already before, the founder and editor of New York City Photo Community Newsletter, which is a weekly newsletter and Instagram account to celebrate the local photography community. David Oxton, I'm very excited you are here as well. David is a Boston area photographer who creates photographs that blend constructed tableaus with candid moments. He's also an educator. And images from his latest Trackside project have been exhibited at the Griffin Museum, Montserrat College of Art, Lesley University, and he has been published in Shots magazine, Cape Ann magazine. All right, quick reminder, put your questions into the chat or unmute yourself to ask directly if you like. The talk will be a little bit over an hour. And I will now turn it over to who is starting, James or David?
David.
That's gonna be me.
All right, so, David, welcome.
Thank you so much. And thanks for James, first of all, for suggesting this. He was the one that first came up with the idea, and for StrudelmediaLive for hosting it. So I really appreciate that. I'm a huge admirer of James's work. I'm gonna get right into it. So I'm gonna actually share my screen here. And hopefully you can all see that?
Yes.
Okay, good. And so what I'd like to do, if people are okay with that, is I'd like to go through this. I have about 34 photographs. What I'd like to do is go through them pretty quickly first and just show you everything first. It's my backyard series and also my train station series, and then go back and talk about 7 or 8 of them, and then stop for a bit. And actually, I'm hoping that in the audience is one of the people that's in this photograph right here. It'd be Steve. He would be in that photograph right there, and he can tell us about what it was like to be photographed and also what it's like to live so close to these trains. So that's what I'd like to do. So let me get started. So this is the backyard series right here. And the first thing I want to mention is that I first got inspired to do this by looking at the pictures of O. Winston Link, who worked in the 50s and really celebrated the steam engines of his time, the last of the steam engines that rolled through Virginia and West Virginia. And he photographed at night, and he used lights. He used artificial lights, and he set up these kind of fake little scenes. And then, you know, there were contrivances, and he would light them, and he would show this the everyday life in these cities, but then the train rolling by, and I really liked that. And so in my work, I also tried to do the same thing using backyards and stations of, you know, setting up shots where it looked like there was a real scene going on, and there just happened to be a train rolling by in the background. And I'm trying to advance the next slide, but there we go. So I'm going to go through this very quickly, and you can see that I'm going to people's backyards, and I'm asking them to pose. And what I did was I sent out about 280 letters to various people that live next to trains. And I got 53 responses from people who generously allowed me to come into their backyards and photograph them. And out of those, I made 44 photographs. And when I first started doing this, I'm clicking, but there we go. When I first started doing this, I wasn't getting very good response at all, because I was asking, can I come into your backyard and photograph you in your backyard? And my wife wisely counseled me and said, you know, I think that's too intimate. I think if you just said, can I come and visit your backyard and photograph your backyard? It's an interesting venue. Then when you get there, maybe convince them to be in the photographs. And that's what I did. And my responses really skyrocketed after that. And so this is some of the stations that I also photograph at. And these are, I just position my camera, my lights, and I take pictures of people boarding trains and coming off of them. Some of the things that I'm facing whenever I go to someone's backyard is usually they put up fences in backyards to block the trains. So the trains are usually hidden behind fences or foliage. They try to do that. And so my compositions, I'm facing a fence. It's sort of a planimetric composition. It can be kind of flat. And when I first started doing this, I didn't quite know what to do with people. I wanted them to be natural, but they weren't feeling natural. And so on a picture like this, you can see they're a little stiff. The composition is a little flat, and that I'm using motion blur to try to get some sense of the train whizzing by there. Now, remember, I'm doing what O. Winston Link did. I'm setting up lights on this. So I'm lighting the people in the foreground. I'm lighting the train. And oftentimes in Photoshop, I'm taking out my lights. So you can see I don't know if you can see my cursor, but right there, you can see a big hot spot. These are metallic trains. And so there's probably a light right about here that I'm taking out in Photoshop. I'm just removing that in Photoshop so you don't see that. And this shot right here, I like the angularity of this one. So it's got this diving perspective. It's got a big diagonal coming out of the corner, and it's got a real moment. This one right here, the mother and daughter are really talking right here, okay? So this is Laurie and her daughter. The last couple was Julie and Alex, and this is Laurie and her daughter, and they're talking. They're actually having a conversation. And so I really like the idea of having some sort of candid moments mixed into all the construction. In construction, I mean, you can see I have to move around. There's a bunch of stuff down here. I moved all around. And when I get there, I sometimes I can I just rearrange your backyard? These people are so generous, and they allow me to do that. So this is Kevin, and he actually works for the railroad. And this is one of the first ones I photographed in this series. And you can see I'm not using any lights here. It's during the day. And Kevin was so generous. He allowed me to come back there. And he just lay down. He said, I often just lay in my hammock and I fall asleep while the trains are going by. He has no problem with the trains rumbling by. He does work for the railroad, so he has some familiarity with it. This picture, I hope to get back to. I hope Steve is in our audience tonight and he can tell us about what it was like to be in this photograph and what it's like to be on these trains right here. Go to this one. This is Artie and his sons, and this is in Andover, Massachusetts. And what I like about this photograph right here is that it's somewhat of a story going on here. This is his father and his youngest son climbing the tree over here, and they have a game set up. And the older son is he's a little bit restless. So he's kind of leaving the scene. So the younger son would climb a tree, he's more playful. The father, will play games, and you can see a lacrosse stick right here. And the older boy is sort of turning away from those things he used to do as a kid. And I like that sort of family dynamic. And this is Steve and his dog Leah. And this is actually not his backyard. This is a property next to his. And his backyard had a huge high fence, and the train was way down below, and I couldn't see the train. So I said, oh, this is kind of a bust. This won't work. He said, well, there is a property next to actually the property next to my property that I own. You want to go over there? And we went over there, and I said, this is kind of perfect. Covered with, all this undergrowth right here. Now you can kind of see what's happening here. He's being lit up. I have a light, and it's hidden behind this tree right here. And so the light that's on him is actually coming from behind this tree, and it's lighting him and Leah right here. And you can see there's a reflection on the train right here. And so the light is bouncing off that, but it's hidden behind this bush right here. And there's probably a light off to the side here that's lighting this part right here. So one of the things that I like about this photograph, I'm going to talk about Ralph and his pool right here. And that is, people love, taking care of their yards, and they don't mind having these massive trains move by them. Ralph is one of the people who says, I just completely ignore these trains going by. It doesn't bother me at all. It becomes familiar. And in this photograph right here, he's in the process of cleaning his pool. And I rearranged his backyard right here, and you can see numerous lights going off back here. Try to, one of the things that I started when I first started this project, what I really wanted to do is actually wanted to show the diversity of neighborhoods that the trains pass through on their way from Rockport all the way down to Boston. They go through communities that are fairly wealthy, and they can go through communities that aren't so wealthy. Lynn being one of them, Everett being another one. I had zero luck getting into Lynn and getting to photograph in the backyards. And I'm really disappointed because I did want to show sort of a variation of different types of neighborhoods. This is actually in Salem. Salem is right next to where I live, is Beverly right here. And these people were so generous. These photographs caught a little bit of attention, and the Eagle Tribune wanted to publish them in their magazines, their local magazines. And so when I asked them to do this, Stephanie and Steph and Brian, if I could come here and photograph their family, they said, yeah. So would you mind? I said, would you mind if there's going to be a photographer there and they're going to be photographing me? And they said, sure. And I said, and there might be a writer there asking you questions. I said, sure. Now they're starting to like, wow, this is way over the top. And when I got there, would you mind setting up a hockey game in the corner? And then it started raining. And they're like, I said, would you mind staying out in the rain? And you can see there's droplets of water on Steph's back right here. And they said, sure. And by now they're saying, wow, this is a lot of work for this one photo. But they were so generous, and their photograph was one of the lead photographs in the magazine. So that was nice, in the Salem magazine. I really like this photograph of Cesar and his family right here, even though there's the train you can barely see. And Cesar told me that he was someone that he actually paid $5,000 above the asking price for his house because he wanted to be next to a train. He loves trains so much. And he said the real estate agent, when they were showing the house, tried to rush him inside so that they wouldn't see the trains going by, because the trains are down below and it makes a loud noise. And when he heard the train, he goes, almost like sold, the realtor was so afraid of the train. And for him, that was a huge attribute. So he wanted to be in that house due to the fact that it was right next to the trains right there. And so even though there's no train here, one of the few pictures I got into photographing Lawrence, I didn't have much luck in Lawrence as well. And they were so generous and so nice, nice family. And I really like this photo. I like the liveliness of the characters in it, the position of all the subjects in it.
David, there's a couple of questions in the chat.
Oh yeah, sure. I'd love to answer them. Sure.
One that they are confirming that Steve is here, but the questions are you using wireless speedlight flashes and rear curtain sync?
Yes, I am on both of those. So I am using wireless. Oftentimes there's 3 or 4 lights lighting the scene. It's all wireless, and I'm using rear curtain sync. The interesting part is that this is a technical part, but sometimes you'll actually see the trains. It looks like they're moving backwards, which would be front curtain sync. But especially when you see the engine. But sometimes of course, the engine gets pulled sometimes, so you're actually seeing the train moving in the direction it's being pulled. So it's all rear curtain sync. It's all a little bit of a technical stuff there, but it's good question. Any other questions? Edwards, or more questions?
Nope. That's it for now.
Okay. And this one right here, you can actually see the light right here. There's my speed light, and it's sitting on top of a pole right here. So you can actually see its effect right there. There's 2 more lights, and they're off screen. They're right over here somewhere, and they're lighting this figure, and they're also lighting this stuff right in here. Interesting thing here is that in this photograph right here, sometimes I'll get to a property that people simply don't want to be in the photograph. And so this is me right here. I posed myself in there. I figured, well, I have a good opportunity to photograph a train going by a property. In Everett, I like Everett. So I decided to put myself in the photograph. This photograph was actually taken in Ipswich. And again, that's me right there. And the interesting thing about this is the train kind of looks ghost-like going by like that. And during the pandemic, the people that lived next to the train said that the trains rarely had people on them. They did call them ghost trains because they would look at the trains going by in the early morning, there'd be nobody on it. no one was taking the train. Some of the stations are there. I'm going to stop here, and I'm hoping to ask Steve, if he's out there, to talk a little bit about his photograph. Oops.
Yes, I am here, David.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much, Steve.
The way you opened this talk, your enthusiasm is what brought you into our house during early days of COVID. So you were just so enthusiastic. I had to share it with you.
Thank you so much.
This photograph was taken from our kitchen into our backyard, which is tiny.
So what's it like living next to train? People that see this photograph, they actually don't think it's true. They don't think it's real. They think I superimposed a train into a porch scene.
Well, it's absolutely real. The little my kids' friends would come over and they would sit at our kitchen table, and literally the train come right down the tracks. Almost looks like it was coming into our kitchen. You get used to the rhythm of it. But during COVID or construction, I guess it is COVID and construction, there's been a lot of rescheduling of the train, and the rhythm of it is just totally gone. So I kind of liked the rhythm, and I don't like the new rhythm. It's not very functional anymore. I can't wake and go to sleep by it. But yeah, I'm not the train fan, but your enthusiasm was awesome, and yeah, it's we can now pause live TV. That's an important thing too, and I might have to go on mute if the train goes by the house right now.
No, we would love to hear that.
I know it. We really wish we could.
Well,
do that.
I can't schedule it for you. I'm sorry.
How often do you have a train come by on a regular day?
Oh, Anja, it's probably 15 trains a day,
Okay.
starting at 5 in the morning and ending around 12:30 at night.
All right. Wow.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
a
it's a
lot.
commuter rail. It's quite frequent. Yep.
Okay.
And it's quite empty, as David said, this time of year. It's with COVID, it's quite empty. And construction up the tracks for me right now. So I don't think there's an actually open stop up the track, but it still goes.
Well, thanks.
David, can I ask a question? Would you stay for 2 trains or just 1 train? Like 1 train, 1 shot kind of thing? Or?
I would stay I usually plan it when I knew there was going to be a lot of trains. So I think I stayed for 2 trains. Is that right, Steve?
I think you were here for 2 trains. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I have a schedule that's almost memorized by now. And I would ask people to go by at a certain time when I knew it was going to be slightly dusk, and also there'd be some trains, usually evening rush hour type trains. Yeah.
Hey, Steve, I was curious. When you got this house, I guess the train track was already there. And was that a concern for you before you moved in, or what were you thinking about that?
It was. I was a light sleeper, but the house was here since 1820, parts of it anyway. This porch that you're looking at was added on, and it's actually, within 2 feet of the train property. We had to get a variance to build so close.
Now, when this photograph made it into a couple of publications, did people talk to you about that after it was published? Did you get extra attention because of that?
Well, we share it widely. So people are fascinated by just the lighting, David, was what I think struck people. It was just, even the way James's face is lit up, my son's face is lit up so beautifully. It just, yeah.
Do people want to come to your house and visit it like it's, some spectacle now? I mean, when I show this picture to people, it's like, what? It seems like it's unbelievable,
Yeah,
and
we do like to let people sit at our kitchen table, and this is the view they have from our
Wow.
kitchen table. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. When I first, I send letters out, and then I look at, I send them out. People I know live next to tracks, and this property. I said, oh, if I could ever get that response there, that'd be amazing. And when you responded, I was like, oh, jackpot! This is great. So thank you
And
so
then-
much. I really appreciate it, Steve.
And then you were in my yard, but you were so enthusiastic. We insisted you come in. I think you were wearing a mask. We were all wearing
Yeah.
masks, I think.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
You allowed me into your house back when that was a little scary and we're all wearing masks and it was a scary time. It was a scary
Well, we've
time.
been healthy. Thank you, David.
Good.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, this is fun.
Talk about this picture really quick. I like this one. The backyard pictures are very contrived, very constructed. And when I'm out at stations, of course, things are happening. I get a lot more candid things because I can't control it. Of course, I love my little lights. I want to control my lights. So you can see a light in here, and you can actually see a light on this person right here. That's actually Chris, and he's got a baby there. I sent him a picture later on. And what happened with this picture, this is actually constructed from a couple of different pictures because I like different setups. He was sitting right here and his baby stroller is right next to him. And then this woman walked by a few seconds later. And I took a picture of her and he had moved. And I was like, oh, I like her there. And so what I did is I joined the two pictures together. And I sent this picture to Chris. I took his name and I sent him a picture. And he goes, oh, this is unfortunate. He says, because my wife's going to give me a hard time because that baby stroller should be right here. And so can you please explain to her that I did have the baby carriage there and you removed it? And so I had to then email his wife and tell her that I did in fact take out the baby carriage. So the baby stroller. He was nervous that he'd be seen as a bad father without the baby stroller there, but it would have been right there. He was a good father. So I think I am done. If there's any questions, I can either answer after James goes or right now if it's a quick question.
No quick questions. Let's go on to
Okay.
James, and then maybe there will be
Yes.
more questions after.
Absolutely. Thank
All
you so
right.
much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David. That was awesome. And so interesting. And thank you, Steve, for coming to the talk too. That was great to hear your insight. So let me go ahead and share my screen. So let me get that bigger. Okay, do we see my mother?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So David is shooting in the backyards, looking at the trains, and I'm from the opposite perspective. But my project really did start with my mother. This is my mother in front of the house that I grew up in Fairfax, Virginia, which is a suburb of Washington, DC. And about 10 years ago, my mother was actually starting to experience some cognitive decline and she had to go into an assisted living facility. So I started taking the train from New York City down to DC on a little bit more of a frequent basis. And, you know, one thing I want to say is just, it's interesting to me, the two cities that I'm going between. New York City is the financial capital of America, and DC is the political capital. But for the most part, people on the train aren't really looking outside. They're sleeping, they're looking at magazines, they're looking at their phone, at their computer. And that's what I did for a while. But then, you know, these were also kind of melancholy trips, you know, because, you know, my mother was in decline at this point. And so I started looking out the window and I became, you know, I'm a photographer, so I just became increasingly interested in what I was seeing and what the world was like outside of the train window. You'd see things like this, like a house with all the windows boarded up. On the left side, you can't fully see it, but like those are doors letting out into the open. And why in the middle of the field? And this has been there for years, actually. Why? And I'd say my initial interest looking outside was actually really with the graffiti that I was seeing. And so that in a way was like my portal into this whole trackside landscape. I thought it was kind of beautiful and special. And so I just wanted to make pictures and you know, like the way David started using a lot of lights, I figured out, you know, with my digital camera, how to freeze the motion, because the Amtrak train, I don't know how fast those commuter trains are going, but can go up to 100 miles an hour on stretches of this track, even the slower Amtrak train that I took. And I would see just these strange sights that were so beautiful to me, like these trees that had been spray painted pink, or just, the beauty of the graffiti itself to me. And at the time I was putting these pictures up on Flickr, and, shout out to the graffiti community. They were very enthusiastic to see these pictures. And so that kind of kept me going. And yeah, so it would just be the beautiful light and learning, try to figure out even, some of what they were saying, what these words were, who the taggers were, Uncle Scum, and you would see them throughout kind of the trip too. Like some people would tag the whole Northeast corridor. And a lot was concentrated around certain urban areas that you go through, like Philadelphia. I would also see, just sort of surreal sights, like a boat in the middle of a field where there's no, body of water around. Also tagged with Sud, which is a graffiti tagger you'd see along that route a lot. I was interested in the junkyards that I would see, and like the way that there'd always be like a cool old car at the top of the heap, like a Corvette. And I was also kind of interested even in the sort of the quantum question of it all. Like, there's this idea in quantum theory that a particle is sort of in two places at once until it's observed. And at the point that you observe it, the particle like locks into place. And so when you're on a speeding train, in a way, the world is like that amorphous quantum particle where you're not really sure what you're seeing. And I kind of wanted to use the camera to lock the world into place. And oh yeah, that is a dog just sitting here randomly by the tracks, or a sheep or something. Or, this guy running up the hill, why is he running up the hill? What's going on? Like, if you're racing by this again at 80 or 90 miles an hour, this is like the blink of an eye that you might see something. So it's just like, what is going on with this story?
Hey, James, there are a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
One is, how did you deal with the reflection in the windows? And the other is, what kind of shutter speed did you find worked best?
In terms of the reflection, the key was to have it be brighter outside the train than inside the train. And so, as gray days and rainy days were kind of out. So even though I might, have gone down 8 times a year, I might have only got, 3 or 4 times a year where the light was right. And I did start to study that, like, where is the sun going to be when I'm going down so that the sun is illuminating the outside? Otherwise, you would get reflections. And my camera is basically like right up against the window. And what was the second question, second part of that?
What did you find worked best as far as shutter speed?
Oh, yeah, shutter speed. So typically it would be fast, like 1/3200th of a second was ideal if I wanted to freeze. Although that kind of changed throughout the project too. Like that picture I showed earlier of the house here, I started experimenting with slower shutter speeds in order to get that kind of effect. Going back into it though, yeah, like when I'm not on a train making pictures, I'm a street photographer, so I'm looking for moments, and that started to interest me too. Like, here's this abandoned factory, and there's, I was like astonished. I didn't see this when I was going by. It was actually like later when I was looking at the pictures, I'm like, oh my God, there's a guy crawling up there, in this incredibly dangerous situation. Or just kind of surreal things, what happened to this electrical pole? Or just, again, kind of a street photography moment, like a little girl dancing in the street next to the Radiant beauty salon. This is in Baltimore. And by the way, I did also become interested in where every picture was, and I would track them down on Google Earth to get that exact GPS. And yeah, it was just kind of mysterious, like these abandoned factories. They started like the way the windows are kind of pierced in this odd pattern. It almost seemed like kind of like the cylinder of a music box, where if you could play this building, maybe there'd be a message that would come out of it, or kind of a Morse code of the way the windows are knocked out on this abandoned factory. and just, again, kind of the surreal nature of it all, like the way that this, the spray paint on the tower on the right side of the picture gives it almost like a cinematic or movie set like appearance to the image, and the fact that you can't see anything behind it really made it seem like a movie set too. So it was all fascinating, but all kind of random. But I would just, make pictures when I went down. Sadly, my mother did pass away about 5 or 6 years ago. But I still kept going down, and I still kept making pictures, just at the, seeing these strange stories, like why are these two wheelchairs in this yard? What's going on? And it was shortly after my mother had passed that someone pointed me to this book by Paul Fusco called RFK Funeral Train. And Fusco is a magnum photographer. And in 1968, Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated. And on this day in June, they brought his body from New York City down to Washington, D.C. And they brought his body on this train, the same Amtrak train that I'm riding back and forth on. And, a typical trip for me takes 3 hours and 20 minutes. But on this trip, people lined the whole Northeast corridor between New York and DC to pay their respects to Bobby Kennedy and say goodbye. And, this became a book. It's called RFK Funeral Train. And for the first time, like I began, thinking about the pictures I was making in a different way. And I was thinking about the America, in 1968, where they had suffered this national tragedy and people came out to say goodbye to Bobby Kennedy and line this track. And I was just thinking, what's happened to America over this past 50 years? There used to be jobs here and there used to be, factories and what was going on. So at that point it became kind of I was looking at it more to look at this trackside landscape and try to understand it as these different layers of history and what's going on and what happened. So I'm kind of connecting it back to the Fusco work in that sense. So this picture, Obama sucks, what jobs? And, the graffiti, it's interesting because there's not a lot of, political graffiti in the sense of related to a politician. Like I never saw actually any Trump graffiti along the route, but there was this Obama sucks. And the question though, that I think is important and what I began to notice is the what jobs part of that, because this is a corridor that had been, hard hit. It's kind of an the backyard of America, so it's going to be a little dirty. It's going to be messy. It's going to be industrial, but it had been hard, really hard hit. And I was thinking of it again in terms of these two power centers, DC and New York City, the financial capital and the political capital, and were people, like Joe Biden, who rode this train regularly to Wilmington from DC. Was he ever looking out the window and thinking about how the way that political policies were impacting the communities along the tracks, or were the finance people thinking about, what they were doing? So on I went, still making pictures. Here's, just, I was always fascinated in the people alongside the track. This is probably an Amtrak worker, maybe taking a cat nap along the way. But yeah, I became interested in what the record was. So that's the name of the project, Track Record. It's kind of also a work in progress. So I'm trying to figure out, each time I go through, I do take a lot of pictures and trying to figure out which pictures will stay and which will go is an ongoing process. But yeah, really noticing the industrial landscape that had been hollowed out, these factories that had closed, and there's a kind of a shadowy figure in here. Maybe this is a nice place to sleep if you don't have a house under that building. And when factories go, buildings start to decline too. This was, I don't know, I thought it was beautiful, just the ornate nature of that porch. I don't know if this was it might have been a train station that was just no longer needed anymore. And then also my relationship to the graffiti. Like before, I just kind of loved the colors and loved being able to capture it. But I began to see the graffiti as sort of a Greek chorus along the way, you know, sort of the voice of the, literally the voice of the communities that I was passing through. And, you know, moments of just sort of urban industrial loneliness in a way, like this lone figure walking out in the field. This picture actually reminds me of one of David Oxton's pictures. Like I imagine him in the backyard of this person, you know, this guy out is having a smoke at the end of the day. And yeah, you know, it's makes me think, you know, like maybe people who live along Oxton's train lines think that, you know, no one can see or make a picture of their lives, but, you know, with a camera you can. So maybe they'll build their fences higher if they're in the talk. But yeah, you again, you know, not only would the factory close, but and some housing would go down, but you'd see whole, you know, business districts just completely shuttered, you know, every building boarded up, and the whole, and you can imagine this was a pretty vibrant little commercial district at one time. Or this picture, which was, you know, particularly poignant to me, where, you know, one side of the house is like something you see in, you know, a war zone, like completely bombed out, and yet people are still living on that other side of the house, you know, and you can see their clothes hanging out to dry. Yeah, there was a sense too, like you see a lot of trash kind of barreling down the sides along the trackside landscape. And in a way, it seemed like it was, you know, to me, again, with the graffiti speaking, it was like a retch, you know, it was like a vomiting up of, you know, just the detritus of neglected communities. In the station, sometimes there'd be moments of poignancy though. Homeless encampment. I liked this encampment in particular because the person had put a door leaning against the tree so you could knock on the door if you were going to visit them. And sometimes just kind of crazy scenes, you know, again, in the street photography mode, where it's just like this guy running along the highway, the entrance or exit ramp to the highway, you know, pulling up his pants as he runs by. Felt like kind of an agony in a way. And so, yeah, you know, with no jobs and no houses, you also see kind of the police state and the carceral state. This is a schoolyard fight in New Jersey, and you can see a kid over here videotaping it, you know, or yeah, filming it with his phone, some kind of fight here. Sir, they know us. Or this scene in Wilmington, you know, again, Joe Biden's town, just kind of a surreal scene. I don't know what that building is, if it's a police station or a jail or what, but it's just so ominous with those 3 police cars. And you do go by a lot of jails. There's like 5 prisons along the way. And you know, you could see them, and just in this picture, that one person, you know, most people are just hanging out in the yard recreationally, but that one person looking at the train, looking at me. This graffiti, freedom will blossom from the ashes of prisons, you know, kind of a hopeful thing. And so I was wondering, you know, what is the hope? It is kind of a bleak landscape that you see. So I also wanted to explore, you know, we've seen the destruction of the past 50 years, but is there creation happening too? Is there hope in this landscape as well? And in a way, I look to nature to sort of guide us a little, like seeing things, like there'd be a lot of places actually where you do go through little bits of nature, but they, you know, they're very crowded in by this Northeast megalopolis. But, you know, you'd see deer. Again, you know, with the chorus, I think love is real, you know, and maybe that's something that will help the divisions that we see here. Some people obviously happy to see each other after being apart. This is a landfill in New Jersey, and, you know, nature is coming back. You know, I've seen eagles, I've seen turkey vultures, you know, this looks like a beautiful heron flying through the air. I liked this picture because this seemed to kind of show that idea of nature being a guide, where you have this, again, an abandoned building and some kind of smokestack or exhaust stack, and the pipe is curving down. And I guess when it rains, maybe water funnels through that pipe and runs down that section of the wall. And I love that the vines climbed that particular part of the wall. Or here where the building has been abandoned, but it's almost like a mini park has formed within the abandoned building. So yeah, I have a lot of pictures, but that's it. My mom says goodbye. That's my nephew, Liam, who's here tonight. Hi, Liam, if you're out there. So if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
I would like to ask, so is this project still ongoing for you, or is it morphing into something else, or what's happening with it now?
Yeah, well, during the pandemic, my dad is still down in Virginia. He's 90. And so I'm still going down. But yeah, during the pandemic, I did not, we didn't go down until the vaccines were available. But I am going down. And I can show you a picture here. So this is a picture I showed you earlier, this guy walking through the field. So on a recent trip, I went down, and this same field where that figure was walking through is now a skate park. So there is a sense that maybe, some things are changing and some things are changing for the better. That was really lovely to see. And, I do, since I'm on the same route, I'll photograph the same things. So this is like, it's kind of a perfect little spot, because this parking lot is actually the parking lot of a big church. And then you have this X-rated video store, Excitement Video, and then you have the industrial landscape behind it. But here, this has changed too. So now the adult video center has moved into the smaller building, and they put a lovely daycare center by the risque adult place.
There are a couple of other questions in the chat. One is wondering if your camera made a lot of noise in the train. And another question, what about the dirt on the windows?
Yeah, basically when you're looking out, the dirt kind of goes away. Like you just don't see it. I mean, the main thing that I had to correct for in Photoshop afterwards is the windows are tinted. So they have kind of an amber tint. But that was easy enough, like in Lightroom or Photoshop, what I used to just kind of add a little blue, and that would sort of counteract the tint of the window. But again, the nicer the day was, the better the pictures would be, for sure.
And what about the noise or the sound of the camera?
Yeah, it was probably annoying to people. So I wouldn't choose the quiet car, definitely. I use a Canon DSLR, and it has a quieter setting. So, but yeah, I'd be clickety, clickety. Although I have a new camera that I got during the pandemic, and that's even more quiet. So I will be less of a distraction to people. But most people, they're listening to their headphones anyway, it seems.
Actually, I have a question, James. So, you have to anticipate the picture, right? So you're flat to the window, so something's coming up, but you can't photograph it in advance. You have to photograph it when it passes by. So do you hold your camera to that window the entire time? Are you looking for moments that come through, or do you see it out of the corner of your eye and then take the picture? How do you?
It's kind of a drag. Like I'm literally like this kind of the whole way through. And so I'm very cramped at the end. I don't know how long I'll be able to do it. It's very uncomfortable. But yeah, the camera, it's just like if you are a street photographer and you're out in the street, your camera can't be in your knapsack. Your camera has to be in your hand and ready to make a picture. And same with this train thing. So yeah, the camera is usually like this, kind of against the window, and I'm sort of trying to look ahead to get a sense. And I've been doing this trip, for 10 years or longer even, but paying attention to it for around 10 years. So I do know certain spots, just like, again, in photography, if you're making photos in the world, you know there are certain areas that might have more people or are more interesting in some way or another. So I know certain areas are going to be interesting, and just because of the speed of the train, when it starts to slow down as we go into urban areas, it's just a little easier, and I have more time to see something. So there is going to be more pictures in the near train stops, basically.
We have some more questions in the chat, and I'm going to ask you these one at a time,
Okay.
make it easier. You mentioned some reaction from graffiti artists when you posted these online, and they are wondering if you could tell us more about the community working in spaces like that.
Yeah, I'm kind of like a real, a proudly outsider photographer. I don't really, even this project is kind of, I'm in this weird space, I'm in kind of a surveillance space where people don't realize I'm making these pictures. Like if you're, just like in David Oxton's photos, like you could not tell if anyone's on that train making a picture out. And so people can't see me. So I'm very much outside of these communities looking at evidence, the visual evidence I can see as I'm going by, as I'm going through. So I'm not particularly connected, but I would post them on Flickr and tag them. And in Philadelphia specifically has a really vibrant graffiti scene, so if you tag something like Philly Graph or Philadelphia, North Philly, this kind of thing, people who make, or even the names of the tags, as far as I could decipher them, which was sometimes hard for me because, it can be hard to read to an outsider like me. But yeah, so that would get the word out, and that, maybe they shared them. I don't know what they did with them, but those pictures would get a lot more views than, what I thought were my best pictures. So it was fun.
Here's another couple of questions. Are there differences in the way you see the world on the Northeast Regional train versus the Acela? And do you think the specific train line informs the project? And there's also another question from someone else that might be related. How do you keep from getting sick?
From getting sick?
I guess like motion sickness.
Yeah. Well, the Acela and the Northeast Corridor are the same train line. So it's just the Acela is a faster train. So then the regular Northeast Regional train, they call it, the Northeast Regional, takes like 3 hours and a half, 3 hours and 20 minutes. And the Acela takes like just about 3 hours, or maybe even 2 hours and 50 minutes or something. So it's faster. So, it's more expensive, and I don't take it because it's too fast almost for my pictures. Like I would never see things. It's just going too fast, and it's kind of bumpy. So, maybe this is the kind of thing that our, infrastructure bill will fix, is making, on the Asian high-speed trains, you can like balance a quarter, they're so smooth, but that is not this train route. It's a very bumpy route. And there is a second leg that goes up to Boston where David lived. And I've taken pictures out of that. And that's interesting too, because the trains switch over from electric to diesel, I think. And so they're a little slower, and it's a whole other place for someone else to explore. And
do you like just click when you see something coming, or is it more?
Yeah, like in certain, again, with my, the Canons that I've used, they have like a high speed shutter. So if it was like specific areas, I would sometimes turn that on, but that was really loud and distracting. So I actually didn't like to do that. But yeah, like insert, if I saw something interesting, I'd try to get it. And it was hard. And, millions of times I missed, I did see some, I would be looking out for people, and I'd see someone, like walking along the tracks, or just people where you don't expect them, and I'd miss it, so sometimes you got it, sometimes you missed it. And, but familiarity with the route was certainly helpful.
One person is saying that they thank you both, and they will never see Amtrak the same way again.
Good. Yeah, I have another project that I didn't show any pictures, like where I'm making pictures of the subway, the New York City subway, as it goes over the Manhattan Bridge. So I'm on the bridge, kind of like David, looking in and making portraits of people. So it is interesting, what our cameras are capable of. And, again, I think of things like the Google Street View that's making pictures in an indiscriminate way. And what does it mean for me to kind of be making these pictures in a more discriminate way? But what are the implications of that? There are backyards you can look into, but one thing you notice is people don't really hang out in their backyards that much, at least when the trains come by.
Well, I don't think David would agree with that. David, what's your response to that?
It's absolutely true. People don't hang out in their backyards. That's the thing I saw when I was taking the train. I'd see the backyards, no one's out there. So I have to bring people out to the backyards. They don't spend a lot of time out there, from what I see.
So that was one of my questions for you. Because your images are so choreographed, you basically, tell people where to stand, you set up the lights, it's all planned. And is one reason, I guess that's your approach. That's your artistic process. But I'm just wondering, is that also because people wouldn't actually be out there and you ask them to go out there and then they wouldn't know what to do? So you rather choreograph it. Is that how you?
Yeah, I failed badly in getting people to do natural stuff. They weren't doing anything interesting. So I had to play Winston Link, and I had to put them in the places I wanted them. And at first, some of the contrivances, I felt almost guilty what I was doing. And then I thought, well, if Winston Link were live today, he would definitely use wireless. He's not going to string wires along. He would definitely use Photoshop to take out the lights if he could. So it's all about Winston Link, and I'm constructing these photographs, and they're not real. They're almost like theatrical production. They're performances. They're performances in the backyard. Just happens to have a train going through it.
Have you ever done other trains, David? Like long distance trains and elsewhere?
I have. I think I realize I'm not that interested in the trains. I'm interested in the stories of the people who live next to trains. Yeah, the trains I love having them there, but I would never just pull out my camera and photograph a train.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, without a person in it.
There is another question. Edward, would you mind?
So, question for David. Did you composite elements with the backyard photos the way you did with the one with the stroller and the people near the bench?
I did. And again, I felt guilty in the very beginning. And then someone said, stop feeling guilty. Winston Link used to use multiple, used to composite some of his negatives. He set everything up. And so again, there were times when it was really mosquito-y and the people couldn't suffer. They couldn't stand being outside. So I'd say, I tell you what, the train's not come yet. You are in the foreground, do your thing. And when the train goes by, I'll photograph the train. I'll put them together. It was, I wanted to make sure that people weren't, you got to trust me. There were nights when the mosquitoes were eating me alive. And so I didn't want people to suffer. It's enough to go into the backyard and ask them to pose. It's another if they have to sit there for 20 minutes and wait for the train with mosquitoes all over them. So, yeah.
Did you ever try making pictures like the way I'm doing it from out of the commuter train to some of these yards?
I did. That's when I first started. When I took the train, that's what I'd be interested in. And again, I was interested in the industrial part of the landscape. I'd go through Everett and all the junk. They seem to put every junkyard next to the train track. And that's what really attracted me. When I first started the project, I was more interested in looking at junkyards onto the trains. And then I started being more interested in the backyards that I saw. And I was just curious about who lived next to trains.
Yeah, I saw a good quote like that relates to my project in that, where a guy named Harold Rosenberg said, American life is a billboard. Individual life in the US includes something nameless that takes place in the woods behind it. And in the case of a commuter train, it's going through these nice neighborhoods, but in the Northeast corridor, it is that kind of nameless, something going on in this backyard. What is it? Almost like the movie Blow Up, Antonioni, where there's a murder that he captures with a picture. Sometimes I'd wonder, like, would I see something? Because it just had that kind of eerie quality where it's the kind of place where crimes might happen, or there might be evidence of them, other than the economic crimes that were so clearly inflicted on the area.
All right, are there any more questions from anybody? Okay. James, David, anything you want to add on before we close out the talk?
Thank you, Anya, for presenting this.
Yes, thank you, Anya, so much.
All right.
And Edward, thank you, Edward, for helping out.
And thank you, David, for saying yes to this talk. It was great to see your work and hear more about it.
Thank you so
long
much.
been curious about it.
I hope that you will be able to maybe show these two projects together in one space, because I feel like your two approaches are so different, but at the same time, there are so many similarities. And I loved seeing them together in a way. I think that's a great way to present them. I think you should really think about
all you gallerists out there.
Yes, all you gallerists out there.
We're ready.
Share your
I told
space.
James the perfect place to show these would be in a train station.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although mine is kind of like a bleak view. That's one thing, like I imagine, like, Amtrak has a writer's residency where they actually pay people to write as they take the Amtrak. And I would love a photography residency, but I don't think it would be in their PR interests necessarily.
Yeah, you're right.
No, you should propose it. They're getting lots of money right now. So
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Thank you, everybody that showed up too. So
all right,
really
thank you so
being able
much.
to show our work.
If anybody wants to say hi to James or David, please feel free to stay. Otherwise, thanks for coming. Hope to see you at future talks. And if somebody wants to stay, please let us know. Otherwise, just log out. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Nice to see everybody. Thanks.
Thank you so much.